Hey everyone, welcome to Diversity of Life with me, Nasi. I hope your holidays went well and you're gearing up for a new and exciting year. You'd better get bundled up because for episode 12, we're touching on a topic apt for this time of year, cryobiology. Fitting for the winter? This is a huge topic, so we're going to focus on some highlight strategies that animals use to get through the winter months. In particular, I'm going to be touching on how organisms freeze. But before we get into that, I've broken down cryobiology of organisms' cold adaptation into two main categories, behavioral and physiological adaptations. Let's start with the behavioral strategies. One that's closest to my bird roots is the act of migration. This is the act of traveling a long distance to avoid frigid temperatures. Convergent evolution is the process of identical adaptations appearing in unrelated organisms, and it's a common occurrence within cryobiology. This is the case with migration. Birds are often the first migratory animals that come to mind when thinking about this topic, but a lot of large mammals, like deers and bear, all the way down to the small animals like butterflies, dragonflies, and moths, migrate thousands of kilometers to avoid the cold. Another behavioral adaptation is seeking shelter. Rather than avoiding the cold, like in migration, these organisms that find shelter find insulating materials to conserve heat during the winter. Some examples of this are that insects will bury into the logs and soil, frogs into the mud, squirrels will collect fur and feathers and leaves to insulate their nests, and humans will find a cozy home. Finding shelter actually leads into our first physiological adaptation, torpor and hibernation. Both torpor and hibernation is the physiological response of lowering the body's activity to conserve energy. Often, this doesn't combat the issue of the cold, hence why shelter is often required in tandem with hibernation or torpor, but the winter often presents a myriad of challenges for organisms, such as lack of food and water. So the act of slowing down the body's activity often helps to conserve food, water, and limit the energy that you need to just that can generate heat. Animals like bears and some small mammals can actually hibernate for months on end, using fat reserves, shelter, and low activity to get them through the frigid times. This leads us to another way we keep our body heat, generating it ourselves. The form of this most familiar to us is homeostasis. Homeostasis in this regard is maintaining an internal body temperature by a variety of physiological means. This can be from the body burning fuel, such as ATP, shivering, or a complex action of blood circulation and muscle action. But it might surprise you that warm-blooded animals aren't the only ones that can generate their own heat. Many bees do this as well. They generate this heat by having super fuzzy bodies and shivering. This shivering is particularly useful in a colony as they huddle together, surrounding the queen, and shivering together through the winter months to keep warm. When shivering isn't enough, animals are good about adapting some highly insulating materials. Fur, feathers, and fat, these three F's are some of the most amazing insulating structures with complex forms created over millions of years of evolution. These structures and some cuddling can keep animals from freezing in some of the most extreme conditions on the planet, such as the penguins. But there are times when not freezing just isn't an option. This adaptation, converging thousands of times across the animal kingdom, is one of the coolest ways to get through the winter. That's antifreeze proteins. Antifreeze proteins are a group of proteins that are strings of sugars, amino acids, carbohydrates, and various minerals that have a myriad of mechanisms to stop an organism from dying after freezing. Often, what causes an organism's death when freezing is internal cell damage from ice crystals. When the water in a cell freezes, it expands and turns into jagged solid structures, breaking the cell wall and organelles in a cell, killing the organism cell by cell. Antifreeze proteins prevent this. Some of these antifreeze proteins lower the freezing point of water in the cell, making the organism able to function past freezing temperatures. Other antifreeze proteins bind to the freezing water, making the water freeze in such a way that it's smooth or round, so that it doesn't hurt the cell, allowing the organisms to freeze solid. Some of these proteins replace the water in the cell, allowing the organism to function with limited water over the winter. Some still make the ice forming around the cell into a suit of armor, protecting and insulating the inside of the cell. The diversity and functionality of these proteins is incredible. They appear in fish, frogs, insects, some microbes. An organism that you might have heard of is called the water bear, or scientifically known as a tardigrade. These organisms are chock full of antifreeze proteins and various other antifreeze structures. Tardigrades can even survive the frigid vacuum of space. Insects and other invertebrates such as the tardigrade are the masters of surviving the cold, able to combine antifreeze proteins, flash freezing, and self-dehydration to allow their frozen cells to survive hundreds of years. In fact, some frozen and dehydrated mosquito eggs have been found to be able to develop after thawing up to 300 years later. These antifreeze proteins are some of the inspiration and drive behind cryostasis and cryonics. Cryonics is the study and act of freezing a human body in the hopes that they will be revived in the future. The idea is that you preserve the tissue in the cells in a suspended animation that the antifreeze proteins provide. The goal of this is that sometime in the future you'll be thawed and revived using future technology, i.e. reanimating from a dead, perfectly preserved corpse. But beyond just preserving humans, these antifreeze proteins are used by us in a lot of different ways. They're used in food preservation, keeping old pipes from breaking in the winter, and cleaning our windshields in the winter during a drive. There is even a lot of current research going on to make these proteins last longer through a variety of conditions. A paper by Stevens and Company from 2007 outlined the addition of structures to antifreeze proteins that allowed them to be superheated to up to 100 degrees Celsius and maintain their function. These kind of discoveries are really groundbreaking. They mean leaps and bounds in areas such as space travel. Having these antifreeze proteins that can survive a variety of other conditions allows equipment to experience harsher conditions for longer periods of time before failing. As always, I want to hear from you. Did you know that so much went into surviving frozen wastelands? What do you think of cryostasis and cryonics? Would you ever consider freezing yourself for the future? Thanks so much for watching. This is a huge and amazing topic, and I didn't even get to touch on some of the crazy things that plants and single-celled organisms do. If you liked what you heard here, please hit the like button. If you want to see more, subscribe. And if you want to see more of my furry antics, follow me on Twitter. I hope you find someone to cuddle up with this winter. Stay warm and stay safe. It's cold out there. See you later, everyone.